Welcome everyone to the first ever Gratte Talks podcast. We're launching with a Q&A in honour of National Apprenticeship Week 2024. With us, we've got an exceptional panel lined up to discuss all things apprenticeships, from how to make your application stand out to what not to do in the application process, plus what you can expect from an apprenticeship with Gratte Brothers Group. I'm Frankie, your host, and joining me is Richard Harris, Group Labour Manager, Tom Delves, Group HR Manager, and Tom Cuttill, former apprentice and now Operations Support Exec. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. If you could all give the listeners a quick introduction to yourselves, who you are and what you do within Gratte. So we'll start with you, Rich.
Hi, I'm Richard Harris. I'm the Labour Manager for Gratte Brothers, and I look after and deal with all our blue-collar labour, from the apprentices all the way up to the site managers, dealing with day-to-day movements, parts of the training, all their CSCS stuff that they need to do, and basically just moving everyone around and making sure we're all sort of good and no one wants anything and get beaten up sometimes.
Brilliant.
All right, so I'm Tom Cuttill. My role is the Operations Support Executive. I recently finished my IT Level 3 apprenticeship about 6 months ago. I help with the support and deployment of our software, which is called Target and AutoBay. Target is essentially just pulls together CCTV footage and links it with the POS data, which comes from tills. I work in sort of a DevOps environment, which helps support the developers and just basically make sure the software is up and running in our sites, and that any engineers that need help with the deployment of it, we're there for them.
Perfect.
Hi, I'm Tom Delves. I'm the Group HR Manager. My role is to essentially manage the HR team and our HR offerings to the company as a whole. The full HR life cycle, which includes recruitment and selection, performance management, disciplinary grievances, 2P comp and bends, etc., etc.
Start with the qualities and skills needed for an apprenticeship. Now, obviously, apprenticeships exist across a whole range of disciplines. As a group, we're often guilty of making more noise about our M&E apprentices, who we recruit annually. But in reality, we have apprentices throughout the group in roles from software development to digital innovation. So with this in mind, what general qualities and skills do employers typically seek in apprentices? Let's start with you, Tom.
I don't think there's too much difference between what we look for an apprentice to sort of someone who's 10, 15 years into their work career. From a personal point of view, I think we would look at someone who can demonstrate a lot of motivation, a lot of commitment and persistence. It's very tough being an apprentice because you have to juggle the work and study elements. So really, when I'm looking for an apprentice, I'm saying, can they cope with that? Are they able to be resilient to deal with X? It is a lot of work, a lot of management. But aside from that, I'd look at candidates who are honest, can display good problem-solving skills, are able to work as part of a team, and have a pretty good general standard of communication.
Brilliant. And Rich, obviously you're closer to the M&E apprentices side of things. Do you have anything to add to that from an M&E perspective?
Yeah, I think what I and those that interview with me, which is mainly site managers, which I bring in, that's really experienced and generally will look after the apprentices from day one. We also tend to look at the future of the apprentice, not just the apprenticeship itself, but also where would they be in 5 years from the apprenticeship. You know, we have had some really good apprentices that have recently, over the last year or two, come out of their apprenticeship and moved into an engineering role. And that's what we look at. I tend to look at not just the apprentice, but what can that person do moving past the apprenticeship? You know, how far can they get within the business? You know, as a family business, you know, we look to promote within all the way up to the highest level. So it's future mini-me's, not just a 4-year apprenticeship.
And how can prospective apprentices stand out in their applications, sort of based on what you've said that we look for?
First things first is, what do they know about the business? You know, have they taken time out to go onto the website? Have they looked at our business? Have they seen what we do? Bring all that information to the meeting. Also, it's really good to talk. I know the guys have just come out of school and it's like a scary moment for them. You know, I've had boys and girls that have done 4 or 5 interviews and okay, but if you get one that turns up to their first interview, it can be quite daunting for them. So I like to make sure that they're nice and relaxed, that you start to talk to them. Just make sure they feel comfortable and they don't clam up and just not talk, because that just really narrows down the interview part.
Brilliant. And Tom Delves, what would you add to that in terms of how they can stand out from your perspective?
I think there can be a tendency with apprentices to maybe try and put too much into a CV or too much into an interview process because they're at the start of their working career. And the candidates, when I reflect, the candidates that stood out for me have always been the ones who's monitor their or adapt their answers to see this is what I've achieved, this is what I've delivered. So having sort of a results-based approach to your CV, being able to dictate, well, this is what I've not just achieved in, like, say, coursework or exam results, but maybe extracurricular activities. Have that sort of CV, which is more focused on delivery. I think that sets them aside for me.
Amazing. Moving on to tips and advice for prospective apprentices. Tom C., what advice would you give to anyone considering an apprenticeship?
I would say always do the research on your job role and the company that you're applying for. I know when I was doing my research on the apprenticeships I was applying for, I really was looking for a company that would have great values, such as like Gratte. I could see from their website, they really had a nice environment, they really cared about their employees. And I think that will just help break the barrier of being treated as an apprentice and actually being a full-time employee, being sort of made as a member of the group, getting more responsibilities. I think that will also help with the company investing in you and helping with your apprenticeship.
So sort of friendly employer.
Yeah, definitely.
And did you say it was the group website that you got that sort of feeling from?
Yeah, so I got on the website, and also the interview. When I had my interview, there was my manager and then my manager's manager that were in the interview. I could tell, they really created for a friendly environment, and that helped me have a nice interview with them.
Could you sort of pinpoint any green flags, as it were, so that if anyone was to go to an apprentice interview, they could say, oh, that's actually a green flag for a friendly employer, or is it just a general feeling?
Well, they talked about the future. It wasn't just about what was going to happen in my apprenticeship. They also talked about, what I'll be doing in the apprenticeship and how I'll go forward after the apprenticeship and just get more responsibilities, which I felt was a green flag. It wasn't just talking about the present. They were trying to see a future for me in that company.
Amazing. And how would you describe your apprenticeship experience in 3 words?
I'd say it was insightful, very practical with the work, and was a good character builder. So that's sort of 2 words, but it really helped with sort of growing me as a character and making me work better in a professional environment.
Perfect. And what's next for you? Do you think you would have made it to the same place without the apprenticeship?
I would say probably yes, but a lot longer duration. If I was to go university, I would just be finishing university now, and then my next step would be trying to find a job, which can take a while. So I think this really just fast-tracked my way to where I want to be now.
It is such a competitive environment, isn't it? Sort of straight out of uni. And I think what makes it harder is that everybody leaves uni at the same time, so suddenly the market is flooded. Whereas if you're an apprentice, you've got more of an advantage on the market.
No, definitely, because I did all my work and then got my experience at once, so it was just easy getting 2 birds with 1 stone.
Exactly. And how easy was the transition from your apprenticeship to your current role? Did you have a lot of support? Did you have a lot of sort of foresight into what to expect?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I sort of did it at the same time. So my apprenticeship was 18 months, so a year and a half. And about a year in, I felt like a full-time employee already. I didn't even feel like I was an apprentice anymore. Grandpa was really let me join the team straight away. I got responsibilities within like the first 6 months. So finishing that apprenticeship just meant that I was, fully qualified and I had the certificate.
Moving on to the application process, what would you say are the most common mistakes you see applicants make?
For me, probably the main one is not really understanding enough about either the company or the role you're going for. Just throwing an application in because it sounds like something which is fun. And actually, when we come to the interview process, the quality of our interviews is high, and it's a competitive thing. So you need to really be sure that what you're applying for is what you want to do, because we're talking at the end of this is a 3 or a 4 year commitment. And you can't fake that. So that's the first thing I say that stands out. Candidates who maybe don't quite understand enough and apply for roles which aren't quite what they're ultimately looking for.
Amazing. And Rich, would you have anything to add to that?
Well, no, I concur with Tom really on that. One thing I do like them to do is they're coming for an interview and if they've come from school, I think most should know by now that to bring their exam results with them. So I'd like to see their exam results. Also, things like their length of their CVs. I get some that are 3, 4, 5 pages long. You can condense that down to 2 pages. Tom sort of summed it up really, to be honest. And it's just attention to detail. When you come in for the interview, make sure you know what we do as a business and what you actually expect from us.
Yeah, amazing. Those are really good tips and sort of very actionable. Anyone listening to this now could instantly go and, like you say, edit their CV, do company research and really help themselves to stand out. So when a candidate reaches the interview stage, what would your key tips for success be, other than sort of researching the company and making sure that you've got that concise CV?
Personally, I think that they should come with questions. At the end of our interview process, we ask them anything that they want to discuss. And it's really good that they come and ask questions. We have had a couple of candidates that have asked us questions after their interview process. How did you get to your position where you are? I want to know how you got there, which is a good question to ask. So I have to respond in terms of, this is where I got to where my position is today. So they're sort of really good questions. Don't turn up and get to the end and have nothing to ask. And also, along the way of the process of the interview, if you're unsure about anything, you should stop and ask the question. It's a two-way conversation. It's a two-way interview. What I tell people is that we're not just interviewing you for a position. You're interviewing us to see whether or not this company is good enough for you.
Amazing. And Tom, do you have any points to add on that?
Yeah, I do. First, I completely agree with pretty much everything that Richard has said there. And, I'd highlight Gratte Brothers are special because we're not looking for apprentices to join us to just do the apprenticeship. We're looking at the career. We're looking at the future. We want people to be with us for 5, 10, 15 years. And that's what generally makes the firm very special. But for the interview stage, it's natural to expect candidates to be nervous. And to any potential candidates, I would say prepare. That's the best thing. The more you prepare, the more confident you'll be. We said quite a lot about looking at the company history, noting down a couple of facts that you think are interesting and then bringing them up in the interview. Preparing questions is essential. Unfortunately, I've been in interviews where candidates haven't asked those questions, and the impression as an interviewer you get is, well, they may be not that interested. So do prepare questions to ask. And also, and it's just quite difficult for someone early on in their career, but try and think about examples to questions which could get asked. We as a company ask what are called competency-based questions, which are generally like, can you give me an example of when you've done this? And that asks you to think of an actual example, a situation you had in your life, which when you're in an interview can take you a while to think about, which can make things a bit difficult. So try and think about like when you've worked as part of a team, for example, or where you've gone the extra mile to work on something in sort of either at school or in sort of other work areas. And having some of those examples in the back of your head will really help that confidence flow through in the interview.
So two-way questions are the way to go. And on that, are there any specific questions that candidates can expect to be asked within their interview that's sort of a generic for any particular apprenticeship role?
For me, I always like asking candidates to tell me their top 3 skills or strengths. Gives the candidate an opportunity to really sell themselves. But when you're asked that question on the spot, it can be difficult because people don't really like bragging about themselves. So have those for me in the back of your head. I think that will help.
Yeah, amazing. And Rich, any further ones?
I would agree with Tom. The question I like is if I ask their peers what they thought and how the character of that person is, what do you think they would respond to? Which is quite good, actually. The first thing that they always say is, I'm a funny person, which is great. And it just sort of relaxes them a little bit. And Tom's right. You need to be relaxed when you come to the interview. And we have got apprentices that are 3 weeks out of school and they come into an interview, and it is daunting for them sometimes. But key questions like, what do we do as a business? Look at the website, pick a project that we've done and ask the question about that project. How big was that project? How long did it take? What was the amount of money it cost for that project? Things like that know that, you are actually really looking into our business. And yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, that's such a good question to ask. What do your peers think of you? That's brilliant. And then Tom C, what kind of questions were you asked in your interview, if you can remember that far back?
So I was actually asked what I describe myself in 3 words, which is quite hard at the time, but I managed to get it. I was asked just sort of what I do within IT outside of sort of school, like if it's my hobby, and IT's always been a passion for me. So I'll give them a few examples of how I incorporate IT within my life. I think an important thing for an employer gauge whether the person they're interviewing does, because if they're passionate within the role they're applying for, then I think it'll sort of help with their work life.
Yeah. On to the final section of the podcast. How do apprenticeship programs support the development of practical skills? So, for instance, hands-on training or mentorship. How do you think that the particular structure of apprenticeships is good for development?
Under our agreement, we have apprentices that are mechanical and electrical, and therefore they are signed up to what we call the JRB, which is the Joint Industries Board, and BESA, which is the Building Engineering Services Association. So they are guided in terms of their apprenticeship. They have assessors come onto site. They sit down and have meetings with their supervisors. We then have meetings with the assessors and also the supervisors. I walk around the projects and see how they're getting on generally. And because they're in college and out of college every week, their skill set and their knowledge is just move forward all the time. So they get to know a lot about the practical side when on site, and also the theory side when they're in college. So it works really well in terms of the support that we give them as an overall.
Yeah, amazing. And from an HR perspective, how do you think the apprenticeship program supports development of practical skills?
Well, I echo a lot of what Richard says. You know, they get the support. Generally, it's 1 day a week at the local or wherever the program is being held, and then that's also supplemented by the teams they work with when they're in work for Gratte Brothers. And again, I'd champion our employees. We've got a long length of service, which means that's a lot of experience that we have, and that's what we like to reinvest back into apprentices coming through. So between the blend between sort of the off the job learning at their college or university versus the practical support and experience they get working for the company, it works. It's a perfect blend.
Brilliant. And in terms of success stories, obviously, Tom C, you are one of our success stories who's joined us today. But Rich, do you have any other examples of success stories in terms of apprentices that we've had that you can share?
We've had some really good success over the last 5 years with our apprentices. We've had 8 to 12 come through. I think at the beginning of the podcast, I was saying about it's not just a 4-year apprenticeship, it's what they go on to do in the future. And that's why we look for future engineers. And we have got 3 at the moment. One's a first year, 2 a second year junior engineers, and they're going through their graduate program as well. And, you know, we've got one of them that's actually been managing small projects. I say small projects in terms of what we do, a £4 to £5 million project as a small project. And one of them has been completely running that on his own, along with the overseeing of the project manager. So it's really good. And we've got visions, and they've got visions of where they want to be in 4 to 5 years' time. And if we can nurture that talent and bring it through in 4 to 5 years' time, they'll be on our bigger data centres, which are between 2 and 300 million, and they'll be managing that, which is a fantastic achievement for a young person that is, when they get to 4 or 5 years' time, still going to be under 30 years of age. So an absolutely massive achievement. It's their dedication that gets them there, and also our involvement in terms of mini-me's and bringing them through from a family business.
Perfect answer there, Rich. So are there any certifications, qualifications or extracurriculars that would boost an applicant's chances? They don't necessarily have to have all of the qualifications in the world, but would you look to see that they have something relevant to the field that they want to go in, or is it not as important because they'll be sort of learning on the job?
It is important for their exam results, even though our industry and what we do is 70% of it is practical, especially for apprentice. There are apprentices that are practical and not so much theory, and therefore it's difficult if they don't get the right grades, because when it comes to the business end of the apprenticeship, year 3 and year 4, then they've got to do some real big exams, theory exams, and they can be quite daunting. So we always make sure that, because we don't want them to fail in year 1 and 2, and it's not good for the business. It's obviously not good for them and for their confidence at the same time. So we do look to have a certain criteria for the apprentice to actually start their apprenticeship. So we look for that to make sure that they're in the right place so that we can nurture them on from there.
Brilliant. Obviously, the world of both construction and software development are very, they've got their own ecosystems within them. So are there any industry-specific expectations that potential apprentices should be aware of? For instance, punctuality, safety consciousness, and sort of awareness of cybersecurity, that kind of thing, or even sort of confidence?
In terms of apprentices and college-wise, it's difficult for them because they're coming out of school, and just when they feel that they've done everything in school, they've been in the classroom, they don't want to go back in the classroom again, all of a sudden they're back into the classroom, and it's tough for them to adapt. But punctuality is definitely key, both at college and in the workplace as well. So I make sure that they really understand the fact that they need to be punctual. And if they want time off, give us clear notice. Make sure the college is aware of time off as well. So punctuality for me is key. Attention to detail.
Tom Dels, do you have any sort of key expectations that you would want people to be aware of?
Yeah, so backing on to what Richard said about punctuality, I think for recruitment of apprentices, we do realise that they're at the beginning of their career, so we don't expect them to have the full working knowledge of their role or industry, and that's for us to guide them and teach them as they go forward. What I would look for is an area where they're interested in the role, whether it's a link to the company or the job, or something like that, which is going to maintain sort of the motivation, resilience and persistence to see through the apprenticeship. But I think, it's difficult when you're interviewing an apprentice to say what actually will stand out, but certainly those things for me are ones that you're looking for someone with a bit of character, someone that is level-headed, has a bit of maturity, and has an interest and can cope with the challenges and demands of the apprenticeship.
Brilliant. Perfect. Thank you. Any closing comments for the team? Because that wraps up the Q&A part. So if there are any further things that anyone would like to add on either their opinions or experiences or anything that we may have missed.
For me, working with apprentices is one of the genuine joys of my job, and I think we will hit 50 apprentices company-wide this year, which for a business our side is a phenomenal achievement. The commitment to apprentices, to bringing young people on, bringing the next generation on, is felt between the directors down through the business. It is a company-wide commitment, and it's one of those things that makes working for Gratte Brothers so special, because we generally do invest and give apprentices the opportunity after the apprenticeship to then put it into practice and then have that career with us. So if anyone is listening to this outside of Gratte Brothers and is interested in apprenticeship with us, do get in touch, because I'm not afraid to say that we do it really, really well.
You are going to be the new poster boy for us. Thanks, Tom. Lovely. And Rich and other Tom, are there any other final sort of closing comments from you?
Well, I would say the same as Tom, really. We are a family business, and what we do it very well. And I would encourage all potential candidates, apprentices to, knock on the door, make the phone call, send an email, drop it into us. We'll talk to anyone. And we're open doors, and we're a company where we promote within. So if you are looking to reach the sky and you want utopia, then join Gratte Brothers, because we'll give you that and the opportunity to do so.
Thank you so much. And Tom C., hard act to follow, but anything from you?
Yeah, I'd just say, just for future apprentices, just try your hardest and be as honest as you can. And as long as you just do them two things, you'll get as far as you want to go. So I would say they're just the two most important things to do when looking to become an apprentice.
Definitely insights to treasure for anyone listening. So that is a wrap for our first ever episode of Gratte Talks. A massive thank you to our panellists for sharing your brilliant insights. And thank you to our listeners. Stay tuned for the next episode of Gratte Talks. And if you have any topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please let us know by emailing marketing@gratte.com. Till next time, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.